Hello. It is Friday Night Live. I'm not going to complain about my computer this week. We did that last week, but this week I can just say it's been quiet around here until I turn this Facebook Live on, and now I've got a bunch of construction going on outside, but that's okay. What I wanted to talk about tonight is something that's called the default bias. Now, if you've been around for a little while, you know that I love to talk about behavioral economics, all of the theories and the human biases and tendencies that we have. I just find it incredibly fascinating. But one that I wanted to talk about tonight came up yesterday in a couple of the thrift savings plan classes that I was teaching, the TSP classes, and we call those financial literacy through the TSP. But I talk about how maybe we can find a little bit more money to put in our retirement savings account and maybe look at things just a little bit differently, and some of the reasons that we have a hard time doing that because we make all of these mistakes. And those are those behavioral biases that we've talked about before. The one that I want to talk about tonight, and that came up yesterday, is called the default bias. I don't know who I should actually attribute this bias to. I'm going to say it was probably, but I could be wrong, Richard Thaler, who actually won the Nobel for economics back in 1997. I think it was his, but maybe not. Anyway, the default bias is our human tendency to kind of just go along with the flow, to take whatever's offered to us. How many people do you know, maybe it's you, who came to work, and it didn't have to be in the federal government. You came to work and you were offered maybe health insurance, right? And you were offered a whole bunch of different choices. In the federal government, we've got like 270 different health insurance plans to choose from. It's really overwhelming. People don't even know where to begin. And we do that with our retirement savings accounts as well. People come to work, we go, hey, we've got a pension plan here at work. You're going to be investing through this 401k, and here are the 25 different things that you could choose to invest in. And people go, but I don't even know anything about this. Like, I don't know how to start. So what we do in that situation is just go with the default. Is there one thing that they generally offer to us? And if that's the case, let me just take that, because I don't want to have to research it. I don't want to have to learn about it. I don't want to have to just even think about it. I'm just going to go, whatever's available, let me have that. Hey, Aaron. So Aaron says, I was in the Navy for 8 years. I'm currently paying my Social Security back. My question is, aren't they both FERS? Isn't that double paying into the same system? So my answer to you, Aaron, is going to be maybe. Okay, so when we are in the military or when we're working as federal civilians, we can have a three-tier retirement, which just means that we get money from three different places. One is our pension. That's our FERS, as you've mentioned that. Or that's our military retirement if we do our 20 years. Okay, that's one payment. We also pay into Social Security, and for that, we get a second payment. And we can also do TSP, which is really what I wanted to focus on tonight, but that's our third payment. So you're paying in, you're trying to buy back your military time, not for Social Security, but for FERS, so that when you make that military deposit, and that's what we call it when you're buying back your military time, when you make that military deposit, now that 8 years that you had is going to count towards federal civil service as well. So it would make you eligible to retire from your civilian job 8 years earlier than if you hadn't paid for that military time. And also, when we figure out what your retirement is going to be, Aaron, we're going to add 8 years to that retirement. So your pension is your creditable service times your high three times a formula, depending on how old you are and what system and all kinds of other stuff. And we won't get into that tonight. But when we multiply that formula by your high three and your creditable service, your creditable service is going to have an extra 8 years in there once you have completed that military deposit, Aaron. That is a great and wonderful thing to do. You will make back the amount that you're paying for that very, very quickly. And I absolutely don't mind if you want to send me a personal message. I can tell you, if you share with me what your salary is, what your high three is, I'll run a retirement calculation for you and show you the value of that 8 years that you're buying back. So it's not exactly double dipping, but it is going to make that creditable for your civilian time. That's a great question. I'm so glad you brought it up. Okay, so as we talk about this default focus tonight, I wanted to ask the question, is it in our best interest to just take whatever they offer to us? And this is very relevant as I talk to federal employees specifically. You're so welcome, Aaron. I'm happy to help. It's so relevant specifically as we talk about TSP. So I want you to bear with me for just a second. I know when I teach the classes and I start getting into history, people's eyes start to roll and they're like, oh, do we have to? But we do, because that will explain to you how I'm going to say this default bias that is our natural tendency hurts us a lot financially when we're talking about saving for our retirement. So my overlay up here, you can see a little bit of history for TSP, and I'm not going to read through all of that, but it did open for the very first time to investors back in April of 1987. And when that happened, we didn't have a bunch of stuff to invest in. Right now, we've got G and F and C and S and I. We've got 10 life cycle funds, and we can do all of those things, and we can change our mind if we want to. But that wasn't the case back in the 80s. We had one thing, G. It was a government retirement account. We could invest in government securities and nothing else. So that becomes the default, and that becomes the comfort level. And that's why everybody goes, okay, G is good, because that's what they're giving to us. So as we go through time and we're adding in all those other investment choices, a lot of our federal employees never try anything else, because they started in G and they stay in G. So what I did for my TSP class yesterday is do some simulations to show people over the long term the difference of working for 20 or 30 years and hanging out in that G fund versus learning something about the system and taking another route versus that default that was just offered to you. So I want to show you that. Another default that we stick with that hurts us financially is the amount that we contribute to our retirement. Again, depending on when you're working, you may have different rules, but within the federal government, when we hire a brand new civilian, or when someone now, this has been since 2018, goes into the military, we're all automatically signing these people up at 3% of their pay. So 3% of their pay is going to be deposited into the retirement account automatically, right? They don't have to think about it. They don't have to go sign up. That's a good thing. But people can get matching contributions up to 5% of whatever they're contributing out of their paycheck. And if we can get matching up to 5, but they're putting us in at 3 and we're just going along with it, then over 20 or 30 years, we can end up losing a whole lot of money. So that's what I wanted to show you in my simulations tonight. So I'm going to go to the next slide and start talking a little bit about those matching contributions, just in case you don't understand really how they work, because there's some confusion, and a lot of my students will come in with misunderstandings of how it works. The maximum that you can contribute to TSP this year is $19,500 unless you are 50 or older, in which case you could do up to $26,000. Matching takes place on a bi-weekly basis. So they don't look at the amount of money I'm putting in and match that. They look at the amount of money I'm putting in and compare that dollar amount back to my paycheck. If that equals 1, 2, or even 3% of my paycheck, then I get a match from the government of 1, 2, or 3%. It's dollar for dollar. And whether I put anything in or not, I'm always getting an automatic 1. So if you look at the chart, you can see the person's putting in 3, they're getting the automatic 1, they're getting 3 as a match, which means there's 7 that's going into that account. We look at what the person's putting in. Again, we're not doing dollar for dollar, but we're comparing that dollar amount back to the paycheck. If it equals 4 or even 5% of the paycheck, they continue to get a match. But for those two, it's at 50 cents on the dollar. It's at 0.5. So what I'm putting in, if it equals 5% of my paycheck, I get that automatic 1. I get a total match of 4 because the last two were at 0.5, which means I contribute 5 and I get 5 from the government. 10 is going into the account every 2 weeks. I double my money before I even start investing in anything. It is critically important. If you are a FERS civilian or a military member under BRS, that you contribute at least a minimum of 5% of each of your paychecks so that you can take full advantage of that match. Now, again, the default, remember, though, is 3. So unless you change something, you're in at 3. So I want to show you over time what a difference that can make in the amount of money that you save for retirement. So again, we're not just stuck with the G fund anymore. We have G, which is invested in non-traded government securities. We have F, which is in fixed income. That's the bond market. C and S are both in the domestic stock market, with C being in common stock. That's an index that's going to be tracking the S&P 500. And then S is for small caps. So those are going to be small to medium-sized U.S. companies that are being publicly traded. And as we go down the list, they get a little bit more risky and a little bit more risky, okay? I is invested in the international stock market, so that's the most risky choice that we have. But you can pick all of them. You don't have to do one or two. You can do every single one if you like. And if you don't want to try to figure those things out, you could go with a life cycle fund, which is represented as a pie chart with 5 slices, those being G, F, C, S, and I, depending on how far away you are from wanting to draw the money. So you can see how they look here. The closer I am to wanting to draw the money, the safer it is. On this slide, I'm showing you Life Cycle 2050. On the bottom left, the way that it looked when it first came out in July of 2011. And what's important here is that orange slice. That's the G fund. That's the safe one. When it first came out, there was very little orange in that life cycle. But as we go through time, every single quarter, that slice gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So you can see, if I fast forward to January of 2021, how much that G fund slice has grown. It's getting safer as we go through time. And when we get to 2050, then that life cycle will convert or be sucked into L income, which is the one you see in the middle. And that one stops changing every quarter. That one has 74% of the money sitting in the G fund. So it's in the safest conservative mix, and it's going to stay that way. So I just wanted you to see what those look like. That doesn't have anything to do with the default option. But here's where we're getting into that. Like I said, I wanted to show you some modeling and simulations. I kind of geek out on this stuff. I think it's really interesting. And although you might not find the theories interesting, and that's okay, I'm not offended by that, I bet you'll find the numbers interesting. So here, this is just a calculator that's available to you right on TSP's website. It's at tsp.gov. You can click the little bubble to indicate whether you are a civilian employee under CSRS or FERS, whether you're in the military under BRS or not, or if you're a beneficiary account holder, which means that someone left the account to you, there's an option for you to use the calculator as well. So I'm going to go in there first as a FERS employee. These are federal employees that have come into the government since 1983. And what I did is just say, I'm starting out right now. I plan to work for 20 years before I retire. So you see that first 20. I put down what the average annual basic pay is. That's going to be different for every single person, of course, but I just took a number and plugged it in there. And this person is being paid biweekly, so I selected that from the drop-down menu. It asked me to put in what I assume the person is going to make in raises and pay increases over the next 20 years. Who knows? But off to the right-hand side of the slide, I did a little bit of research and just went out there and looked at what the pay raises have been in the past and did an average. And I said, okay, I feel comfortable in saying the person will probably get a 1% pay raise at least over these next 20 years. And that's just what I plugged in there. I'm not going to be doing any kind of catch up or additional contribution because that kind of muddies the waters and it makes it a little bit more complicated to look at. And in this particular example, I'm paying in for 20 years. As soon as I retire, 20 years from now, I'm going to start drawing out. That's not true for everybody, but in this example, that's what I want to go with. Now, I'm going to be investing my money in the market, which means hopefully it's going to grow for me over time. So to do the simulation, I've got to make a couple of assumptions. The first one I did was utilizing the G fund. Remember, this is the default option. I came to work, they automatically signed me up for G. Then over time, it's hard for me to see the screen here, so I'm going to pull it up on my phone as well. Bear with me for just 1 second. Over time, you can see there how much money the person has contributed into their account. I just want to be able to make that a little bit larger so I can look at it. Okay, so you see there right at the top, year 20, their contribution amount, that $198,000. But you can also see the amount that the account has grown, and it's right about $42,000, a little bit more than that. Cool. That's because G has had a 10-year rate of return that averages 2.04. It's more than zero, right? It's more than I can get in a savings account right now, that's for sure. And it's more than if I tuck the money under my mattress, but it's designed to track inflation. It's not in the market. So this is the most conservative investment choice that we have. And if I'm just starting out as a new employee and I'm going to work for 20 years, being incredibly conservative throughout that entire career is not going to serve me in the best possible way. So I said, okay, so there's the G fund, right? There's the default option. I make 40,000+. But if I did change something and I didn't just allow them to stick me in G and I just hang out, but rather I went ahead and invested my money in common stock, that S&P 500, the amount that I've contributed over time is exactly the same. Now, I want you to know the amount there, that's from me. That's my automatic 1%. That's the match on my 3% as well. But the amount that I've contributed is exactly the same. However, by now, looking at an average rate of return of 13.90, you see that I made several $100,000 more over my 20-year career, which is really cool. But it's also something that I probably wouldn't recommend everybody do. I couldn't do it. I'm very conservative when it comes to my investment choices. I don't like to take a lot of risk. It's just my personality, my money mindset. I worry about losing. And the stock market sometimes loses. So what if, instead of going straight out for that, I back off a little bit and I go for what the current default is, because we fixed some of these mistakes as we've gone through time. The current default is investing in the life cycle. If I start in In 2020, I'm looking at retiring in 20 years, I'm pulling out my money right away, then that puts me in life cycle 2040. So if I got out of G, I invest in life cycle 2040, again, the amount of money coming out of my pocket is exactly the same, but I made a lot more than if I had just let it ride in the G fund. It makes a difference. Going with the default is not in my best interest if we're talking about me growing as much money as possible for my retirement. But I may have to be a little bit uncomfortable. I may have to do a little bit of research. I may have to go, okay, Deb, you're not going to hold on to this dollar as tight as possible. You're going to let it go just a little bit so that you can grow some money for your own retirement. So that's one example of how the default can hurt me. People hanging out in the G fund. And again, we put them in there for a long time. I understand why they're doing that, but it's not a really great thing. Waiting to invest means that you miss out on growth opportunities as well because of compounding. And I'm not going to get deep into that tonight, but certainly, let me tell you, putting in as much as you can in the front end of your career is going to serve you the best because it's going to grow. And if we're just talking about 13.9%, okay, so let's go with that. If I put in money and it makes 13.9%, then the next time we add interest on, it's on top of that 13.9% too. And the next time it's on top of that, and the next time it's on top of that. So it grows exponentially. Waiting 10 years to get started, not a good idea. Not a good idea. As much as you can, as soon as you can. That's what I tell everybody. Now, here's that second default pain that I wanted to show you. And here, what I did is go with BRS because this is our military and our civilians as well. But I went with BRS, and new military members have been under this system since January 1st of 2018. So I said here, okay, I've got a brand new military member. They just went into the military. We put them in at a default of 3. They're not in the G fund. They're in life cycle, but we're only putting them in at 3. Okay, person's just starting out, they're going to do 20 years in the military, then they're going to retire, and as soon as they do, they're going to immediately start pulling out their money. So same thing that I did with the calculator previously, the dollars are different because I went with a $50,000 annual pay, and the pay rate the pay changes, the promotional opportunities and pay rate increases are different too. And that's based on historical data. For the military, what I saw when I researched the records was on average about a 2% per year pay raise. So I went with the 2%, I went with the 50,000 instead of the numbers that I had on that civilian slide. If this person sticks with the default, they come in, they're put in at 3% life cycle, they stick with that for the full 20 years, then at the end of their military career, they're going to have, I've got this underneath I can't see it, they're going to have $198,286 in their retirement. Nothing to sneeze at, right? That's good. But if this person took 10 seconds to log into payroll and to increase their contribution from the default of 3 to 5 so that they can get the full match over their entire 20-year career, then they have $284,944 in their retirement account. It's a pretty big difference. It's a pretty big difference. So that's my Friday Night Live for tonight and kind of merging it in with a Friday financial tidbit as well. I can see, what do I have? 6 people watching. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Welcome. Aaron, I'm so glad that you asked about your question. If anyone else is listening, you've got questions about this, let me know. Send me a message if you've got personal questions. I will answer those as well. But my battle cry for this evening's Friday Financial Live is going to be this. If you are a federal employee under FERS, if you are a military member under BRS, please contribute at least 5% out of each of your paychecks so that you can take advantage of those matching contributions over your entire career. That's super important. If you work private sector and you have a pension plan at work, ask your human resources office if you don't know what's the match, and make sure that you are contributing at least that. More is better. This is going to be your retirement account, but at least enough to be able to get the match. Okay, everyone, I'm hopping off here. Let me know if you catch the replay. Let me know if you have any questions or you have topics that you want me to talk about next Friday. Take care.